Welcome to the Podcast Superfriends. 5 podcast producers from across North America get together to discuss podcasting.
Hello, everybody. The Podcast Superfriends are here in 2025 to help you sound better. We have fought technical difficulties, we are fighting the cold, and we are certainly fighting some pretty questionable pop culture references, but none of that is going to stop us because we're going to help you sound better, podcasters, in 2025. My name is Catherine O'Brien. My company is Branch Out Programs, and I am a podcast producer based in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Joining me is the rest of the Podcast Superfriends. Oh, almost. Yes. All of the Podcast Super Friends. Johnny, let's start with you. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Johnny. I'm a podcast producer from Fort Worth, Texas. I specialize in audio, video production, and one of my favorite topics is helping people sound better. So I'm really excited about today.
Wonderful. Checking in Boston.
Yes, David Yas, pod617.com, the Boston Podcast Network in Boston, where we sound wicked good.
All the time.
All the time. Wicked.
Let's go to the Great White North.
Matt Kundle from Manitoba, Canada, where people come to me because they want their podcast to sound better. So I thought, why not talk about that today? I'm a self-proclaimed podcast wizard.
And Jag.
John Gay, Jag and the Detroit Podcast. I am a podcast editing ninja, and I even have the T-shirt that says so.
Got
If
ninjas,
you have a t-shirt, that's...
wizards, mages. Everyone needs their own thing.
Is that how you say that word? Mages? Okay.
Mages, yeah.
Well, very good. Well, hey, we want to have some fun talking about sounding better, but there is a serious side to podcasters sounding good, and that is if your podcast does not sound good, that is the number one reason that somebody is going to turn off your show. So although we like to take a lighthearted approach to all of these things, we do know as a podcast people who just love podcasts, not only just it's our profession in producing them, but really it is a critical issue for if you're going to do a podcast. And we know, especially at the start of the year, a lot of people they've got that idea that's been burning in their back pocket. And this is going to be the year that they're going to be doing their podcast. And really right off the bat, they have got to sound good. So we're going to go and talk a little bit about those things about sounding good. And let's go to you, Johnny, since you are so passionate about sounding good as a podcast. What is your number one tip for the person who is launching a podcast? They're just getting going. What is the one thing you want people to know before they hit that publish button on episode 1?
Well, the nice thing about this topic is so broad. So sounding good can mean a lot of different things. And I know Jag is especially excited to talk about one aspect of those. So I'll go from the technical standpoint. So the technical standpoint of sounding good, obviously you need to have your microphone. This seems like, if you've been watching the show for a while, or you've been hosting a show for a while, remember you were just once a budding podcaster who once said, you know what? I want to start a show.
No,
check it out. Nestby.com.
No!
It's only $60 and it looks so cool. It's silver. And you bought that and it probably sounded okay at first. And then you've leveled up a little bit.
For those that are listening and not watching, he held up the Blue Yeti microphone, the infamous
Yes,
Blue Yeti
the
microphone.
infamous Blue Yeti microphone. So you started off, and then as your podcast progressed, you upgraded your equipment, yada, yada, yada. For the people just starting out, budget is not something you have to totally worry about. There's the great thing about being in 2025 is technology has advanced to the point where there are great options for $50 and there are great options for $500. So what I recommend starting right out is look for, if my budget was $500 to start a podcast, I would spend $250 of those dollars on a Shure MV7, this microphone you're looking at right here. Number one, because it gives you the ability to plug in an XLR cable if you're going to record in person for podcasts, which is always super fun. The majority of people are going to be recording podcasts remotely over the internet, similar to what you're seeing right now if you're watching the show. That also, this microphone gives you USB-C plug-in capability. You can plug it right into your computer. You can take your laptop on the go. You can record from anywhere. A high-quality microphone, getting clean sound right out of the gate before you send it off to an editor, before you send it off to a producer, before you put it into your AI audio generator thing. Getting the clean audio is the best thing you can do first. It's really hard to make crap audio sound good. So if we can sound good out of the gate, you can bring people along to make you sound even better.
I'm going to push back on one point that Johnny just made.
Nope. This is a dictatorship. My word is law.
The
And
microphone.
are you stealing
Johnny's-
my loving counterpoint right away? Okay, Jag, keep going.
Fine. The microphone Johnny recommends, absolutely recommend it myself. The Shure MV7 is a fantastic microphone. The MV7 Plus is the newest version of that. If the $250 price point that Johnny just threw out scared you, it's okay. It's a great microphone. If you can swing it, buy it. You want to make the investment, buy it. But if you really are doing this on a very limited budget to start, I will say the ATR 2100X microphone, which will run anywhere from like 60 to 70 bucks on Amazon, will sound good. The MV7 will sound great. The ATR 2100X will sound good. And if you got to start somewhere, start with that one.
That's right. Good. That's a great tip. Now, that's a good technical. We started with the technical side. Now, Jag, you wanted to share with us a point, and I think I'll have a comment after you're done talking about just no, not a rant, about just the process, the sort of the more storytelling element, the show flow kinds of things. What are some of the things you would suggest to people about sounding better in 2025?
It really is thinking about economy of words. I have a couple clients that I've just started with that started in 2025 where they kind of want to do a trailer or first episode, and they kind of, I don't want to say got all their thoughts on paper, but got all their thoughts into a computer with audio, and I whittled it down for them. The best thing you can do really is have bullet points and know where you're going to go in your conversation. You know, Catherine made the point of the number one tune-out factor is bad audio. I 100% agree with that. The number two tune-out factor for me is rambling, endless conversations that don't have anything to do with the podcast. You've got to hook somebody in the first 30 seconds, give them a reason to stick around. We could have very easily started this conversation with David, Matt, Johnny, and myself having an NFL football conversation, and we would have lost anybody who doesn't care about football and wants to hear about podcasting. Think about your listener from the other side of things. They are committing X amount of time, 15, 30, 60 minutes to your podcast. You want to reward them for that time. Their time is very valuable, the only non-renewable resource. Be considerate of their time by word economy, getting to your point, and not rambling about the great new breakfast place down the street or look at the weather outside, because you never know when somebody's going to listen to that episode.
Jag, just a counter question or whatever. If you're a well-established podcast, can you earn that right? Is it possible some listeners want to hear the chit-chat?
Yeah, I'd say that. I think if you've got established inside jokes with a big enough audience, I'm not talking about your audience of 10 people. I'm talking about a larger audience than that. But if you have things that are baked into the show, the IYK, whatever it is, if you know, you know, those are a couple Easter eggs like that are certainly fine. But if you have to remember that the first impression is the first 30 seconds of your most recent episode if somebody finds you in Apple or Spotify. If I'm new to your show, don't alienate me in those 30 seconds.
Absolutely.
Jag, I was on a call today with another producer who, and we were talking. He asked me, what do you tell your clients when they say, "I want to get better at hosting"?
Oh,
and your chit chat comment really kind of reminded me of that conversation. And I think there's always these fine lines in podcasting where you're balancing things. Mm-hmm. And I think where you're correct is the chit chat that comes from being uncomfortable behind the mic, where you don't have a ton of reps. You're really early on and you are sort of nervously stumbling through trying to get to the point, and you can't really navigate yourself. You can't navigate your way to the meat of the episode that you're trying to get to. So you're filling the time with trying to you're just saying words so that you're getting more comfortable. I think that as you progress as a host, or you progress as someone that has reps on the mic, that chit chat becomes part of the show. And it becomes really entertaining as you become more entertaining as a host. So you're able to kind of, to use the Trump phrase, weave in and out of going to the topic at hand and then veering off somewhere else that's still interesting, not necessarily on topic, and then weaving our way back in there. So I think it's something that every host finds their own rhythm as they get more comfortable behind the mic.
And to that point, Johnny, I think understanding that that chit chat that sounds good is actually very hard to do. This is
Yeah.
not just like, oh, we're just, we're just having a little banter and building rapport. Those are actually really hard things to do. So to make it sound so easy is actually quite a skill to do. And it does take practice. I have noticed two trends that I think are fit in this category right here. And one of them is that people might be, the podcast host might be recording all of that intro banter and might pull out a gem and in a introductory way say, okay, we first, we covered a lot of our bases, and then, the guest shared this little tidbit, and then bring that clip in, go back into a more proper intro, and then into the actual heart of the show, the meat of what the episode's all about. I think that can be very effective because you do have that time where it's just, we're behind hot mics and we're talking and we're getting all those little nervous pieces out, but then you're still able to capture those gems. So, and also I like that narrative technique of saying like, here I am as the host, I'm bringing you in sort of behind the scenes. We had this great conversation. Here's a little gem, and then let's get on to the episode. I think that actually really works. Another trend, and I know we've talked about this before, is just getting right into the show. And I think that especially in earlier podcasting days, since we know that people have their attention is highest right at the beginning, there was a lot of preamble, pre-roll, sponsored by, all those kinds of things, just tons before you actually get to the episode. And I see a lot of really very successful podcasts have dropped that. They're getting right to the good stuff off the bat. And there's plenty of time later into the episode to cover the how did you get here, how did you get started, take it back to those early days, whatever. But getting to the good stuff fast gives a little investment to your listeners right off the bat.
Can I throw in that if you're listening to this and you don't really understand, how do I make it quick and how do I get into it? And maybe you think you're already doing it by your intro. I think that first 30 seconds to a minute, if you're just reading the LinkedIn bio, if you're reading a resume, and a lot of people are, I think you need to, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about being a better host. We're talking about connecting with the listener. If you need to give an intro, and you probably should give an intro to your guest and why the person is here, you need to give them the hook on why in 45 seconds, why they need to listen to the next 45 minutes.
Yeah.
You need to formulate that. And, this also goes to audio promos, and it's a lesson that I was taught because I had to learn how to do audio promos all over again. It's not just, this is what the show's about, and I really hope you listen. In this episode, you're going to learn the following. We're going to dive into this, that, and the other thing. And those are the three things you need in order to, and my guest is so-and-so who will tell us how. Hello.
Right.
David, you've got a lot of showman elements. Do you have any comments about getting to the good stuff sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's been covered, but I would add that as far as the bio of the guest goes, spot on. Two sentences max. Here's Joe Blow. He is an entrepreneur. He's launched dozens of companies, and he's going to tell us about his journey. Just that is really enough. You're going to get into the rest of this stuff later. I think one of the other sins that we commit is in asking questions, we sometimes think the question is kind of a big part of the show. So we'll say, Mr. Jones, let me ask you about your journey, because you started from very humble beginnings. I mean, you were living in the suburbs of San Diego in a trailer, and then now you're the president of a company. And it's like, what's the question? And I think we all do it because we want to make the show better. So we want to make the question sound better. Just ask the question. Just ask the question. The interesting part is going to be the answer. And then the follow-up questions now, if you have something to add, if that reminds me of when I lived in San Diego. Let me tell you a quick story. Sure. Do it. If your listeners don't like you, they're not going to come back anyway. So it's I mean, if they share a story, you want to share a story too. Yes, it's a conversation. Go for it. But don't try to make your questions more artful by putting in all these adjectives and these little facts, aside facts. Get to the point.
Get to the point, friends. I think those are all really great tips.
Anybody want to take a shot of that comment? We're actually being told we're doing it wrong right now.
Oh,
Read it to us, Matt.
It says if you're going to do a live podcast, you need to engage your audience, or you might as well just pre-record it, edit, and put it out later. Just my 2 cents.
That's a
Well,
fair.
I saw
So, yeah.
Jeremy. Well, I saw Jeremy put a different comment earlier. Jeremy, I apologize that we're not addressing your comments. One of them was you recommended getting a condenser mic. I would actually give a loving counterpoint and say that for podcasting specifically, you should consider a dynamic microphone, because all of us are sitting in rooms that are not professionally treated studios. Professional singers, musical artists, NPR radio, the really big podcasters, they're going to be using condenser mics because they're sitting in a treated studio. The reason condenser mics are used there is because it's picking up everything in the room. A dynamic mic that all 5 of us are using right now, I think Matt uses a condenser, that are using right now, it's just picking up everything right here. I don't need them to pick up the fan that's going on in the background or the heat when it kicks on. All of that stuff is going to be, it's not beneficial to the listener. We just needed to pick up the voice. So, apologies for not hitting your comment earlier.
I would like to say that I've had this microphone, but I have moved studios since then. In this room, it feels a little bit less treated, so I feel that there's more echo. And as a result, I will probably be looking at putting in a Shure microphone in the near future that is dynamic, so it cleans it up a little bit. It's something I'm considering as I'm thinking about making the show sound better for 2025.
You can get the SM7DB, the brand new one, for $400 or $500. It's got the built-in preamp if you really want to break the bank. Or an RE20.
I do. I think I do.
Catherine, there was one other comment I wanted to add on this too before we switched off. Was there's a lot of this stuff that we've just been talking about over the last few minutes. It's all very abstract. It's all very host dependent. At the end of the day, you're going to find your own rhythm for how you do your show, because every podcast is different. One thing that you can tactically implement into your show right now as a host to become a better podcaster is speak slower. Sounding good, a lot of that too is the crutch word aspect of it. The last thing anybody wants to hear, the worst podcasts that we hear are when
Today, Junior,
the host just can't seem to spit it out. And a lot of that has to do with the nerves. Your brain is running at such a fast pace because you're thinking to yourself, "Oh my God, I'm on. The recording light is going. I have to say something interesting." And then your brain gets caught up with your mouth, and you start spitting out those crutch words. The easiest way to stop yourself from doing that is slow down. Slow down the way you talk. Those ums and uhs then get replaced with a nice pregnant pause.
dramatic.
So that's
pause.
something you can implement right away and take away from this.
Can I piggyback on that,
Jag,
Johnny?
please. Yes.
If you have the benefit of working with an editor, or if you're editing your own podcast after the fact, or you're using one of us or someone who does what we do, another great tip is if you just butcher a sentence, if you just stop, wait a beat, start the sentence over, or start from the last natural pause. It makes it so much easier for you or your editor to edit. Rather than having to splice words together or make an edit in the middle of a word, which is another trick of the trade, you can certainly just stop, go back to the last place you paused, restart. It's a quick snip for you in the edit. It'll make your life that much easier. And I have to echo what Johnny said about the ums and uhs. It's hard to train your brain to do, but it's the easiest solution. If you can just wait a second, as opposed to just wait a second, you can hear the difference right there.
The other trick is if you're searching for your words, and sometimes it works just to be natural, like just to say, what's the name of that guy? Oh my goodness, why can't I think of his name? He's the coach of the Detroit Lions, the big tough guy, Dan something. Dan Campbell, thanks. Hopefully your partner jumps in at that point. But
biting kneecaps.
But the listener will accept that you're human. You're really doing yourself a service if you're being more conversational. Jeremy had another comment. I don't want him to feel disengaged. Do you want to read the last one? No, he was recommending a Sennheiser. There it is.
Sennheiser.
Sennheiser MK50 is unreal good for recording without a mic in front of your face. Check it out, says Jeremy. I've never used that. I will check it out.
And his other comments were talking about pencil shotgun microphones, which is a different approach to it if you want to go with that route where it's one directional and kind of points right at you. So he's recommending that particular mic, the MKH50, which I'm going to write down and look into.
Look at us. We're all
I just
diligently writing it down.
I just
Yeah.
Googled it, and it's a $1,400 microphone. So maybe try the $60 microphone and then the $250 one first.
Wow.
Get the podcast going for a few episodes, then maybe think about the $1,400 one, unless you just have it lying around.
Nice flex, Jeremy.
I've got a $1,400 Sennheiser in my corner. It's an MKH. I think it's the 416. But the microphone that I'm using right here is the NTG3 from Rode. And, Rode microphones are very sensitive. So it's picking up a touch of echo, which I'm not happy about. But on to 2025 and maybe getting another one.
Have you complimented your Rode since they're so sensitive? No.
No, I
Well,
usually bitch at
speaking
it all the
of-
time. I can't believe you're picking up all this echo.
Speaking of echo and sounding good, Catherine, is that a good pivot point into potential post-production tools that we can use?
Well, sure. I was going to say, since we're shopping for $1,400 mics, I was going to say this is a great chance to say, hey, would you like to support the Podcast Super Friends? You're more than welcome to. But if you want to talk about echo, let's go ahead. This crew here, this team of Podcast Super Friends definitely loves a good tool. So, Johnny, you have something I can tell is burning. Tell us about a tool that you love.
Well, yeah, part of sounding good, and like we mentioned earlier, not most people aren't going to be sitting in treated studios for their podcasts, so there's going to be room noise. There's going to be the fan in the background. There's going to be echo if you're not sitting too close to the microphone. It's not going to be as great and perfect as we want it to be. That's what's so amazing about these tools that have come out that are available to everybody. You don't have to have the suite of tools that we use. We're using, as we do this stuff every single day. So I'm using third-party plugins. I'm getting really surgical with echo removal, vocal leveling, noise removal, things like that. If you're looking at me and going, Johnny, I don't have the time or the inclination to figure out how any of that stuff works, what's just a great tool that I can use right away? The one that I use almost every single day applies mostly to guests of shows that we're working on. A lot of guests will come on podcasts. They might have a microphone that looks like this. They might just be recording into their computer microphone. But there's a great tool called the Adobe Voice Repair. I'm fairly certain that's what it's called. I'm pulling it up right now. It is called the Enhance Speech tool from Adobe.
Yes.
You just drop your audio right into there. It cleans it up for you. You can use a dial to see how much attention or how much strength of the tool you want to apply to the voice. And Jag uses another tool that he's going to share with you next. But that is the tool that I would recommend. You can just drop your audio right in there. It'll clean it up, not incredibly well, but it will do the job to a certain extent. And that's something that anyone can start using right now. All you need is an internet connection and some audio.
I will say, if to use large files on the Adobe Enhance, and the website, by the way, is podcast.adobe.com or podcast.adobe.com/enhance. You have to have an Adobe subscription for larger files, but they do have for smaller files. You can do it. My hunch on this one is that it was modeled after Zoom recordings and trained on Zoom recordings, because it does a pretty good job of pulling up that bass echo and a little bit echo and room noise. And you can get it to sound great at like 15 or 20%. It defaults to 90% when you upload a file, but if you go 15, 20, you'll notice a pretty good difference.
The moment has come. We've all been waiting for this. Zoom has entered the chat.
Oh, no.
David, your time has come. Tell us.
Zoom. So the reason why they're mocking me gently is because I use Zoom to record most of my remote podcasts, and there are other more advanced podcast-friendly platforms, but I do like to use Zoom. And so I'll give you just a couple quick tips on if you're going to use Zoom and record a podcast, what some of the settings should be, etc. First of all, if you have a guest connecting by Zoom,
Matt has pulled up the line. 4 out of 5 podcasters on the show do not use Zoom. I will use it in case of emergency. So
In emergency,
3.8 out of 5.
In emergency as well.
Emergency backup, it's great.
okay.
Now that we've cut you out at the knees, Dave, please tell us how to use Zoom.
So first off is when you have a guest connecting by Zoom, if they have a microphone, there's a fair chance they don't know how to set Zoom to pick up the microphone. This is simple stuff, but a lot of guests will not know it. So if you don't know, you just tell them, go to the lower left-hand corner of the app. There's a little microphone icon, and there's an arrow to the right of that. You click on that, and you should be able to select both your speaker and your microphone. So you want to make sure, and it's amazing how many times people go, oh yeah, they thought they already did it. They went to their computer settings No, you need the settings in Zoom to link up to the microphone that you're using. The other thing is sometimes when they do that, they'll select the correct mic and they can't hear you because what they did was they selected the mic on the speaker. So there are two settings there, microphone and speaker. Simple, right? So speaker is where you want to hear it out of. Now, a lot of microphones, plug-in USB microphones, will have a headphone jack that you can plug in. It is a good thing to do because then you can hear your own voice back when you're recording. It's just makes you feel a lot more like a podcaster. This is your guest we're talking about. So if they select, you might have to tell them to unplug the mic and start over because they can't hear you now. So you got to do this or whatever, put something in the chat. But you want to have the speaker selected as the microphone also if your headphones are plugged into the speaker. So the microphone. The other setting that is probably the most important is there is a setting called use high quality audio. I'm looking for the exact terminology here. Well, I think that's what it is. You want to go to audio settings and there's a button that says, there's a couple buttons. One says suppress background noise. You certainly want to select that and play around with the settings in Zoom.
Dave, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah, sure.
The background noise, I think, is going to depend on your situation. If you got somebody on a good mic that doesn't have a lot of background noise, that can cause distortion if you select it. In most settings, in a normal room with background, I would say use it. But I think that background noise is only useful when you need it.
You can set it to low also.
Oh, perfect. There you go. Yep.
So that's probably the way to go. So that's a good point. And then it's the show in meeting option to enable original sound. That's a mouthful, but that's what it's called. If you go to audio settings, you can do that before you get on the Zoom call if you want. In meeting option to enable original sound. And once you select that, anytime you go into Zoom, you'll see it on the upper right-hand corner of the screen. It'll say, do you want the original sound? If you click yes, it's a lot better. I use it a lot actually because I'm playing like sound effects and stuff. I'll play a sound effect. No, that's probably not the right one. Anyway, if you don't do that, because Zoom does a lot of things automatically to reduce sound, and sometimes you don't want that because you want the original sound. So it'll try to filter out things like in the background, but you might want that stuff when you're doing a podcast, or you might want some other noise coming from your computer. So there are other things you can do. You can go into the settings in Zoom and you can request to record your speakers in different tracks. This is useful if you're going to take the time to edit it in post. It's very useful if you have one speaker whose level is very low and you want to raise that. So Zoom has the capability of recording in different tracks. It'll record you in one track and each guest in a different track. And for those of you using video, you might want to take a look at the video settings because I have mine set to record in speaker mode and gallery mode. I like both options because you never know if you're editing a video after the fact what you're going to want. And, speaker mode is just, it's going to switch to the speaker every time the speaker's speaking, obviously, or gallery if you want them both. If you get both versions, and some of this is because I have the premium subscription to Zoom. I'm probably the only one on the call that does, but play around with those choices and yeah, it'll work a lot better for you.
David, I have a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Matt.
Because there's like 3 settings in there and I'm already confused. So one of the settings is music and professional audio. You can also enable original sound. And there's also, I think, high fidelity music mode, which might be that. But do you know what the difference is between those and which one podcasters should pay attention to?
I would suggest enable original sound is the only one that really matters. You can try the other ones and experiment with them and see if the sound is crisper or whatever, but I want that original sound. I don't want Zoom cutting me out. Zoom will do that thing where one speaker starts speaking and it automatically lowers the voice of somebody else. And for a podcast, if somebody tells a funny joke, you want that natural feeling of everybody laughing together, and you can get that if you enable original sound. If you don't, Zoom might do some weird stuff where all of a sudden you just hear, or you don't hear anything at all. So that's what I recommend. The others, I admit, I haven't played around with all of them. Certainly, do your worst and click some buttons and see what happens.
Jag?
Because I unintentionally cut David out on a couple of those and contradicted him. I want to back him up on something he said at the end. Having the multiple versions of the video, and I think the file will be labeled, I believe, AVO and GVO when you download them. The speaker view where it toggles between the speakers of who's speaking, and then the gallery view where it shows everybody. I have a client that still records in Zoom. It's just easier at this point, rather than she doesn't want to learn a new platform, and that's totally fine. And that speaker view doesn't always move fast enough when the speaker changes.
Absolutely.
There can be a lag when the co-host picks it up from the host, and then now if you don't have that ability to edit that video, you've got the shot of just one person while the other one is speaking, and they're sitting there just listening.
Right.
So it is really important to have those options if you're going to edit the video. And if you're just going to take the straight raw video feed and not make any edits, then sure, take that gallery view. It's going to show both people or all the people at all times and run it. But if you're going to edit it and tighten it up and make it really a good quality product, having those options, the multiple options in the video, is really helpful.
And I think just even, David, the fact that there are these advanced settings, we all are using different platforms, and being able to take the time to sort of experiment, and knowing that that the advanced settings are there, having the time to experiment and finding what's best for you, that's going to get you a lot further than just going with the standard and just not being completely happy. Before we leave tools and Zoom, Matt, you have a question.
This one's for David and possibly Johnny. And so let's say we get into it on Zoom and somebody just doesn't have a microphone and the host sounds good, but the guest sounds bad. Would you take the guest audio and run it through something like Adobe Enhance and then come back and edit it together with the host?
Yeah, because primarily in podcasts, the guest is going to be doing the majority of the talking, especially in guest-driven, interview-driven shows. They're going to be doing probably at least 60% of the talking. If they sound bad, the whole episode, I feel like, goes to hell in a handbasket. So here's what I would do in this situation. If I were David and I were using Zoom primarily as a podcasting recording function. So have you guys ever heard of the All In podcast?
Yes.
I think so.
With
That's the sports
David
one?
Sachs and Chamath. It's like it's like these 4 VC guys. They have a massive podcast. What I have been reliably told that they do, none of them have microphones like this, and if they do, they're off camera. They look like this.
Great.
What I have been told that they do, and what I would recommend people doing as well, because sometimes when you're running a mic through Zoom, it doesn't always sound great. It still kind of has that zoomy feel to it and zoomy sound.
Sure.
Tinny. What is great for Apple product users is just open up QuickTime in the background. So your microphone's plugged in, open up QuickTime Player in the background, hit File at the top, click the drop-down menu, click New Video Recording. It's going to record your camera. It's going to record your microphone in a really clean feed that doesn't require an internet connection. So if your internet drops, it doesn't cut out anything. And then it'll also record your camera as well. And there's a little drop-down menu within the QuickTime Player window where you can set your mic, you can set your camera, turn the volume on that all the way down, hit record, just let that run in the background. That's what those guys do. Then they come together on Zoom. Now they have 2 options. If something happens on Zoom and their internet drops or it just doesn't sound great, they all have those QuickTime backups that I think that they use as the primary audio and video that goes out to everybody.
That'd be my guess.
So yes, Matt, in that instance, you always want to clean up the guest audio, even if it's combined on one track. It's worth the extra time it takes to cut out all of that guest audio, move it down one track on your DAW, export that, put it into Adobe, put it into Studio Sound, get it cleaned up. Because, I mean, we all really care about the listener experience, and in these guest-driven podcasts, you have to do what you can to clean up the guest audio.
You will be slightly sobbing, like a quiet sob as you're doing it, because it does take a lot of time, but it's a nightmare. Worth it. It is a nightmare, but it is absolutely worth it. David, did you have something to say about that?
You answered it well. I mean, the audio filters, I don't use the Adobe one. I use the one in Descript, which is called Studio Sound, which is I've done back and forth. Very similar results to both. But sometimes that will do things that you don't want to do. That it'll cut out certain little words and things. So if you've got the host has good audio, it's best not to mess with it. The guest has horrible Zoom audio. You you got to mess with it. So, yeah, I sometimes live in fear of going through an audio track and knowing I want to filter some of it and some of it I don't. That takes a really long time. I'm sure we've all done that. But if you got two separate tracks, you're ahead of the game. So.
And one of the things, Jag, you can probably chime in on this too, because I know you and I both do this. Jag and I, with our clients, we will do what are called audio pre-checks. So our clients will jump on Riverside, they'll jump on Squadcast, they'll jump on Zoom. We will also show up about 5 or 10 minutes before the recording and just get everybody set up. The host, hey, your microphone isn't plugged in. Let's get that plugged in and set to the correct standing. Your fan is on in the background. Let's get that turned off. I can hear a dog barking. Can you close that door? Let's close your shades. That light's coming in. Let's reposition your camera a little bit for a better angle. The number one thing that I always have to remind people too, everything goes on do not disturb. Slack, Outlook, email, your phone, anything that goes ding on these remote recordings is getting picked up while you're talking. And it always happens when the guest is saying something super profound. They get a Slack notification. I can't cut that out. No one can cut that out. It's a nightmare to deal with. So, have a short checklist. If you don't have a producer that's joining with you on these shows, have a short checklist. Okay, air conditioners are off. Shades are closed. Internet connection is strong. Notifications are silenced. And then
Johnny says air conditioners are off because he's in Texas. Matt and I and David are like, how about heaters?
It's 33 out here. We're freezing our butts off down
What a coincidence. It's minus 33 here.
I turned off the heater for this very podcast. There was a professor who wrote a book, and I was kind of following him on a couple different podcasts episodes. He was being a guest because he was promoting his book. And I was like, I am going to email the department chair of wherever he's a teacher, get an intern in there to turn off the notifications, because every single interview that I heard him on, there was ping after ping after ping after ping. It was just like, please deliver the intern. I beg you. Any other tools that anybody want us to say would like to share right now? Because I have a little surprise for all of the Podcast Super Friends. Yes, Jag?
I'll jump in with one. We talked about Descript Studio Sound. We've talked about that in previous episodes. Riverside also has a magic audio feature, which will enhance some bad audio, but there's no dialing the percentage. It's just, use it or don't use it. And Descript, which now owns Squadcast and Riverside, they do have the ability for you to edit your audio as a Word doc. So if editing audio is not your thing and you don't have the budget to hire somebody to edit, you can give that a try. It does have limitations, certainly. You can sometimes tell when an edit has been made, but it's an option for those on a limited budget who may not have the tech savviness or the desire to learn how to do it.
We love, speaking of sponsors, let's get them to sponsor us, because we bring them up almost every single time we talk about the Podcast Super Friends. David, you are our forerunner on some of the AI things that are happening. Do you have an AI tool you want to share with us?
Yeah, unfortunately, it also comes from Descript. I have a couple, but the first one I wanted to mention does come from Descript, who is constantly trying to up their game when it comes to AI, and they have voiceover robots, basically. So instead of recording a voiceover intro or something, you can type it in and then pick from a bullpen of about 8 to 10 voices. And so I took the description of this very podcast, the Podcast Super Friends, and then I added a little flair and I ran it through the machine, and this is what the robot sounds like. I'll play it for you now.
Hey, what's up, guys? You got to check out this cool show I just stumbled upon. 5 podcast veterans hosting a monthly live-streamed roundtable about podcasting. Sounds awesome, right? If you want to evolve your podcast, or if you've got an idea for a show, there's no better place to start. Can I get an amen? The Super Friends dig deep on all the details you might not think about. Like, for example, best practices for your show's website and other stuff like streamlining your weekly workflow, marketing your podcast to the masses, and getting the most from your RSS feed.
So I just said now I'm conscious of it.
The masses.
It was so human that it
adds the disfluencies.
Yeah.
Well, I added those, but I just wanted to see if she would give it the right inflection. And I'll play this 5-second clip back.
streamlining your weekly workflow, marketing your podcast to the masses.
Now, the way she said, that's subtle, but the robot knew exactly what to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
It was under her breath. It was like,
Why
can all say
apostrophe
amen.
no, not
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
right. So, and I've had good success in other situations. When she said, "Can I get an amen?" That was only okay. But a lot of times I'm surprised at how the AI voice understands inflection. And so I don't want to put voiceover artists out of a job. I think they're great and they work very hard at what they do and everything. But if you need an intro to a podcast, you can play around with this on Descript. Oh, sorry. Matt, on the screen, Matt is telling us that if you go to mattkundlevoice.com, that's a real voice and it's going to be much better than this. But I'll say this. How about as a compromise? In a pinch, if you need a quick little, intro to your show or a transition, sound sting or whatever you want, experiment with these. It's getting better. It's scary, but it's getting better. Next year, the Podcast Super Friends podcast will be done all by our avatars instead of us because we're busy people. So
I know you joke about that, but it is possible to take a blog and dump it into Notebook LM and for two people to have a conversation about it. And I think it's a great prank if you want. So if you've got anybody in the house who has a blog, take their blog, stick it into Notebook LM, and then play it back for them. And immediately they want to call a lawyer and sue and say, who's plagiarizing my work and doing a podcast and monetizing it? And it's that should be a good joke for about 6 months.
That's a Google tool, Google LM, right, Matt?
Correct. Notebook.lm is
Isn't
what
it?
it is.
Isn't it expensive?
I think it's free.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay.
You're the product.
Color me
Yeah.
interested. You're the
Yeah,
product.
you're the product.
That's the price. Oh, those are great tools. Any other tools?
Yeah, I've got one.
Matt
and-
Kundle.
So you might be saying to yourself, I don't really know how my show sounds, or I don't really know how to make it better. And if you don't know, well, maybe you should ask. And that's where you should probably be doing a listener survey and ask those questions about the sound. And I think there's some questions you can ask inside the survey that can get you the feedback that you're looking for. So you already know that you can go and see the consumption in Apple and Spotify. That will give you a good indication. But you could ask, is the show too long? Is the show too short? Do you like the guests on the show? How do you listen to the show? Do you find it to be a positive experience? Does the sound good? Just ask your audience. They'll let you know.
Matt, do you ever worry about the stated preference versus revealed preference in those kinds of surveys, asking those questions? Meaning what people say that they like, which versus what they actually respond to?
Yeah, what they say versus what they do. So I probably, I'm looking for perceptions. I'm not looking for reality. So when you ask a question like, do you think the show is too long or too short? These are just perceptions. This doesn't mean that if you got a lot of too short, that you should make the show shorter or longer. Definitely don't do that. But if you're actually, what they're telling you is, we're really enjoying the show and we always wish there was more of it. So it means people are liking your content. You got to be careful about making decisions based on feedback. And I'll tell you why. It's because the product that you're offering is free. And people commenting on something they're getting for free never really sort of have a connection to it. But, if they paid for it, then you probably get your survey would come out a little bit more honest, a little bit differently. They feel that they're invested into the show. And we learned this from radio research years ago. And that if you ask people enough about what they really want in a radio station, they'll say one of two things. We're tired of being asked about what we want in a radio station. Or you'll get this, it should be some sort of jazz fusion radio station with no DJs, no talking,
No ads.
one type of music, no interruptions. Because people will say they hate everything and absolutely no commercials ever. And the truth of the matter is, if you put this on the air, it's going to suck. So you've got to be careful. You're really looking for perceptions.
You play the same songs too many times.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, can you play that song again?
I love that song, right?
Yeah. So remember that your product is more than likely free. and that you're really looking for perceptions. And so if you're going to make a change, how are we going to change that perception? Because I really don't want to change my show too much, but how are we going to change the perception that it is to whatever comes back?
Very good. David, one last tool from you.
Sure. Well, I'm the one last tool. No. So you radio guys know that sound effects can be effective, and also they can be a little bit much. And I've been accused of doing too much of them. But I'm a fan of it. If you're doing like a list or something, why not have some sound stings before, like number 1, number 2? I like them as guideposts for the listeners. So one show I do, it's just like item 1 is like, item 1. That's a legal show. That's the sound of a gavel, and item 2 and such. I wanted for have I mentioned that I have a music podcast that thank you, whoever
You do?
the 49 minutes into the pod, whoever had that in the pool. It's called Past Tense, a top 10 time machine. We do drafts, and we do it. This is for fun. We will draft like the top albums of 1981, and I wanted a jingle to do like this. Here's round 1, here's round 2. I used Suno.com. I've mentioned it before on the pod. It's still there is a paid version, but there's a free version. It creates songs for you. You can type in the lyrics, or you can tell it yourself. And so for the jingle for round 1, this is what it came up with.
It's round one. Damn, we're already having fun. Na 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 na.
You can decide whether that's annoying or not, but it's and you can try that a bunch of different times to see what it spits out each time. A lot of fun to work with if you want like a little intro. It doesn't have to be silly. You can tell it to be in a style that sounds corporate and professional instead. So
how do you spell Suno.com, Dave?
Suno. Suno.
No, I just want to make sure because I'm going to try it for my podcast.
Yeah, no, please do. Yeah, I don't know why it's called that, but Suno.com. It is being sued by the record industry, so use it while you can.
No.
Great. Oh, boy. And from our own Podcast Super Friends, non-practicing attorney at that. Very good.
That's right.
Well, those are great tools. Okay, I have a little fun surprise for the Podcast Super Friends on the topic of sounding better. You know that I love a little lightning round. So I'm going to do a little bit of a audio sins. I want to hear which is the worst audio sin. Ready? Mouth clicks or breathiness. Mouth clicks or breathiness. Which is the worst audio sin? Jag.
Define breathiness further.
That was really awkward when we all did it at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to say breaths are worse because to the trained ear, we hear the clicks, and believe me, they drive me insane. It's like the water dripping on your forehead, that torture. But the breaths are much more noticeable to folks, especially when it's a really loud breath, rather. If you want to leave a small breath in between a sentence, that sounds natural. But if somebody really gets the end of thing or is really thinking about an answer when you ask them a question and the guest goes, that can be distracting if it happens too often. Lower the volume on it a little bit.
I agree with Jag. There's a great plugin from Isotope called Mouth Declick. You drop that on your audio, the mouth clickiness is gone. It's a fantastic tool. Another way that the breathiness can be really annoying is if you're just leaving both tracks alone. You're not playing with, muting out the non-speaker. So Jag, start talking about something.
I'm going to start talking about my wife does that to me all the time.
And
that's for a different reason, Jag, though.
It's totally normal. People breathe, and not everybody is a professional podcaster, or has a ton of experience being on a microphone. So stuff like that is prone to happen. But I would say, because the breathiness is a lot harder to remove because you're going after each individual one, whereas this Isotope plugin just broad brush removes every click automatically.
David or Matt, any vote on the breathiness versus mouth clicks?
I'm a voice actor. Mouth clicks means I'm going to be redoing the sentence.
And I should also mention, to prevent mouth clickiness, there are little things you can do because you may not realize you're doing it. Make sure your mouth isn't overly dry or wet when you're doing a podcast. Make sure
have that perfect mouth pH level.
Well, honestly, and I learned this from our radio mentor back in the day. You know, your natural temptation is grab a bottle of water out of the fridge if you're in person, offer it up to your guest. Cold water is really bad for your voice. Room temperature water is much better because it's like your vocal cords are like any muscle. If they get cold, they're going to be stiff as you're trying to speak, especially for a prolonged period of time. So keep hydrated, but not too hydrated and not too cold, not too hot. Just Goldilocks.
Yes, I've been drinking a lot of tea today. Lots of warm tea out of my mug here. Go Bills. Something else is they say a green apple will control the mouth clicks. I go one step further. I will actually take a swig of apple cider vinegar.
Wow.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That sounds like
David, do you have a vote on this last one before the next?
hippie medicine.
Yeah, I'd vote that the mouth clicks is worse because I have that problem, and listeners have commented that I click my mouth. I thought I was doing it on purpose to make a point, like, but no, I just do it all the time. If you're doing it on purpose, that's a different thing. It's same with the breathing. It's like you want to sound frustrated to make a point. It's like, I can't believe we're talking about this again. Like that's fine, but. I'm going for some apple cider vinegar. More important. Yep.
Next audio sin, echo or crutch words. Echo or crutch words. Which is the worst audio sin? Jag is reeling, so I'm going to you first.
Oh, I'm on the fence, honestly. Let me go last.
Johnny.
We have to choose Jag. We don't have to marry ourselves to this decision. I'm going to choose Echo every single time. There is just way too many. There are too many podcasts out there today that have good, not great, but better than your audio, that if you have Echo in yours, it's just so distracting. No one has it anymore. You can't do it. It just is such a indicator that you're not like taking the next step to make this a more professional product. It's so bad. You have to remove the echo before anything else.
Depends on how much echo. If there's a little bit of room echo, I can deal with it. If it's
you know what I'm talking about though, enough to where it's noticeable. Like
if it's to the point where it's distracting, yes, worse than I'm gonna.
It's crazy.
It's also drives us crazy because it's fixable. I would vote echo is worse as well. It's fixable. You know, I mean, so fix it. Wait, what was the other one? Oh, crutch words. So crutch words, I think we can't stand them. We do have software that can take them out. Descript, again, does a great job at that. But you'd be surprised how many... I did a podcast once. These two hosts had a guest on. He was a hockey coach, I think. And he said, more than... we started, with a one round of players. And then, and I said to the guys afterwards, I go, the guy broke the record for and they said, oh, really? I didn't notice. And I was like, how could you not notice? So sometimes the average listener doesn't notice it as much because people do talk that way. Now, it's still not great, and we still should work to get rid of our crutch words, but echo is more of a deal killer sort of right away.
Echo will get rid of the listener faster than anything.
All right. Any last votes on?
Catherine, you want to chime in, or are you only moderating this panel?
I'm moderating this panel astutely, if I may say so myself. The final audio sin, peaking, meaning too hot, or too low, too quiet. Which is the worst audio sin?
The answer is peaking. I can't fix peaking. I can fix the other one.
And sometimes
you can fix it. It distorts past a certain level, but the peaking that I'm thinking about is the one that kind of stings your ear when they laugh too loud or clipping peaking. I would say that because it's all about creating a comfortable listening experience. And when they're peaking or they're clipping, then it's just, and then you want to turn it off. When it's too low, okay, we crank the volume, fine. Bump some gain on it in post, fine. I would say peaking. Well,
related to that, I got to say a related sin is too loud and too quiet. When you have the host and the co-host at vastly different levels, picture somebody listening either in AirPods or in the car. And the worst thing you can do when you're driving in traffic and you're trying to remember where you're going, and Johnny's miming it right now, turning the volume on and up and down every time it switches between the co-host and the host, that'll lose somebody quick because that is maddening as a listener.
Yeah, and to your point, to piggyback on that, lower is probably less of a sin, because think about, I mean, you've kind of said it, but if one of those moments in your car when all of a sudden out of nowhere your ears get absolutely blown out, or worse in your AirPods, if it's too low, you can usually turn it up. Now, if it's unlistenable or it's so much lower than everything else on the internet, then yeah, I mean, you should fix that. But usually people can turn it up. But once they try to turn it down, maybe they've lost some tissue in their ears. So we don't want that.
Okay, so I've got a question. Because my first 4 episodes of my podcast that I started back in 2016 sounded like that. I felt like I had to like turn it up and turn it down every time somebody was talking. So what would you recommend to fix that? Is there a plugin or is there a tool? I've heard something called Levelator. Is that what that does?
Levelator.
Yeah, I was going there too. Go ahead, Catherine.
Well, yeah, Levelator is a great free tool, and Jag can give the direct link to it because, well, here, let me tell you this. I thought that Levelator was just for Apple. And as a non-Apple user, for years, I was denying myself the use of Levelator. This is a great free tool that can bring the levels up to the same, to equalize the levels of audio of multiple speakers. It is a great tool. I love it. And I'm so thankful that it actually is for PC as well as Apple. And it is something that I try not to use because I try to have great audio going in, but it works well if you have that problem where people are at different levels. It brings everybody up to the same point. Great tool.
And pardon me, Catherine, it's its own app. It's not like a plugin for an existing
Correct.
app. Okay.
Yes, that is right.
If you're looking for a plugin, what I use is, for when we say plugins for the people listening and watching, if you're taking your audio, you put it in GarageBand, you put it in Adobe. What's the Adobe version, Jag?
Of
Audition?
Audio.
No.
Audition. Yeah.
Audition.
Yeah.
Yes.
Audition. I use Logic Pro X. There's a great company called Waves. Waves is a third-party plugin creator, and they make one called Vocal Rider. So think about a surfer riding a wave. The Vocal Rider plugin will, you'll set it to, okay, I want it to be at a certain decibel threshold, the audio. Okay, the audio that I am now picking up as the Vocal Rider plugin is way too low. I'm going to raise it up, and then I'm going to bring it back down, and then I'm going to bring it up. And it does it in real time with the audio. So it keeps everything at a really nice, tight level of whatever it is you choose to set it at. So if you don't want to drop it into a website and then back into your DAW, you want to just do everything within one program, Vocal Rider is what I use.
That's a great tip. Okay, and we can all agree that the greatest audio sin is when the ads are louder than the actual podcast episode. That is the greatest sin of all.
Does anybody know how to make sure that they're level?
Matt, go ahead.
I think you need to follow the instructions from Apple and Spotify, because we're going to assume that 80% of your podcast listeners are going to listen through one of those two things. Apple asks that your sound be at about minus 16 LUFS, and Spotify at about minus 14. If you land your sound somewhere in there, the ads should come out correctly.
Yeah, split the difference. Go minus 15.
Yeah.
That is a great tip, rounding it out. Well, this has been a great start to our 2025. We'll go around and say goodbye in the most beautiful, natural-sounding voices that we can possibly muster. David, we'll start with you.
I'm sorry. What was the question? This is called.
We're saying goodbye.
Okay, I can handle that. Yes, David. Yeah.
In a natural, non-AI, real voice.
Well, the thing is, I'm here in Boston, and David Yas, pod617.com, the Boston Podcast Network. Thank you, Catherine.
Johnny.
Hi, I'm Johnny Podcast. You can follow me on X at Johnny Podcast. Please subscribe to this show on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify, or however you consume your podcast.
I'm Matt Kundle, and you can follow me on the Sound Off Podcast, which comes out every week. And as well, you can find me at soundoff.network, on X at Matt Kundle. Go Bills.
And Matt is a professional voiceover actor.
Which you couldn't tell from that exit.
Jag.
Before I forget, shout out to our new friend, David Campbell, loyal listener in Canada, who was on a call with earlier today, and he said he couldn't wait for our show today. So, David, thank you for listening.
Love you, David. Thank you.
I am John Gay from Jag in Detroit Podcast. You can find me at jagindetroit.com or on all the socials at Jag in Detroit, JAG.
Since we're doing shout outs to Jeremy, shout out to Descript, and the Podcast Super Friends are wishing you a great 2025. Again, Catherine O'Brien, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Podcast Super Friends. For a transcript of the show or to connect with the Super Friends, go to the show notes of this episode or go to soundoff.network.